feel like everybody's right and everybody's wrong.
100%. Why is this important? Why are we even going here? He's helped a lot of guys. He's also not had success with a lot of guys.
Come in with a purpose, and they're very intentional with what they do and how they do it.
From the majors to the sandlot, baseball and softball share space in one place. Welcome to the farm system.
Fellas, and the ladies, welcome back to another episode of the pod here with our guys.
Hey,
our guy.
two of them now.
Yeah.
Just two of them.
Well,
We got Steve.
who?
Steve.
Oh
Steve.
yeah, Scuba Steve. But we have Jarrell in the
I know,
pod too, so we multiple people.
Yeah, Jarrell slides.
All
in
I'm
once in a
saying
while.
is, like, my phone. I've been getting all these phone calls. These people have been trying to sell me insurance. These got me on the auto dial. I keep blocking phone numbers, and they
Honestly,
just
that's
keep
the devil
calling
trying
me,
to
baby.
keep us from spreading the word.
I'm trying to tell you, you be trying to spread the word around here, and it just be getting us.
That's classic.
So Code, right? We have a couple different topics that we've talked about that we're going to go into, but why don't you? I said, Cody, you get the pick. You get the pick. So Cody has a topic for us to talk about today, and we're going to get into it.
Yeah, so y'all know, I've been marking down my ideas from the questions I hear y'all ask, from the questions I hear players ask, from the questions, I just be having myself. So, but one of them that came up that you sent to me, that I know we were both, started talking about a little bit, and then we had to shut it down because we had to save it for the pod.
Yeah.
Is this DM is someone asked you in particular about some like ground force information, right? And then so one of the questions was asking if the front foot
this
force.
was if I remember correctly, he said that he heard Tewksbury talking about it on
in their
podcast.
podcast.
Right? Okay.
Yep. Brought up Tukes, said that he mentioned it in his podcast, and said his quotes: "Front foot force peaks twice."
Yeah.
And so does the front foot in the ground and the force being created, the ground forces. Is there two peaks there? And then also, he said, does that mean all hitters' body weight transfers to the front foot twice? Was the question that he had from that topic. And then he had an add-on question. Is it possible to produce ground force 2 times your body weight?
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll go to the first one. The first one that I think is interesting is when he asked, does that mean all hitters' body weight transfers to the front foot twice?
Yeah. So I think the first thing with ground force that's super important for us to realize too is it sounds like he might have getting caught up between the difference between body weight and force. Those are very different things. And that's going to kind of go into a lot of things as we kind of go through them. The other part that's super important is understanding force doesn't mean weight shift. So that's also different. Remember, force, I don't need my weight to be over there to create force, right? So that's going to be a bigger thing as well, right? So, for example, I could have all my weight on my back leg, but when I put my front foot down, it's still creating force on the front side. Now, again, if I want to create vertical force and some of these other forces, I think the biggest thing of misunderstanding of ground forces as well is understanding that it isn't one force, right? So when we say, does the front foot peak twice, right, or the front leg peak twice, is got understanding that obviously the front leg has its own forces that it creates, and then also with that being understanding as well, just because my foot is the thing in the ground doesn't mean that it's just purely coming from my leg, right? That's a big thing as well. Your body and how your body is rotating into your leg, right, or not into your leg, is going to cause those forces to fluctuate in those things as well. Now, because I'm the one that had the conversation. Like Tank got his whole booty hitting the mic. He got Tank is in action. Here we are. He's back and he's talking the pod. He apologizes for not being here on time. All right, we got a whole bunch of babies in the building, and so he's over there running around, trying to spend time with all the young ones. Steve? Hold on, I'm gonna say it right this time.
Oh. No, he's not.
Candelaria. There it is. Candelaria. Steve, he brought his son in today, and then Jarrell also got his baby here today too. So we got the babies here, and then now we got a little baby Tanky. Okay, so let's get into the first question. First question here is, does the front leg peak twice, right? And let's just break that in by itself. Yeah, so what Tukes is taken from is a conversation that I had with Tewksbury is that the difference between golf and baseball is that golf, your foot's on the ground, you don't stride, right? So the first peak that you get from a vertical force, and we're specifically talking about vertical force here, right? We have vertical force, horizontal force, also within torque, right? Again, there's all these different forces that are happening, right? So I want to be very specific. Vertical force, there is typically 2 peaks in vertical force. One, when the front foot hits the ground, right? And then also another one as they're going into contact, right? So in golf, you typically only see the second peak. And if you do see in their chance, if they see a second peak, it's usually, again, like someone avoiding, like getting into their front hips and things like that. And again, we'll sometimes see somebody with 3 peaks or things like that, which also would correlate more with golf and like what they see. Their second peak would be our third peak.
Right.
Because we're striding, we see multiple peaks. So yes, the first question would be, typically hitters will have 2 peaks. If you don't have 2 peaks, it's actually, again, and we were even teaching that in the beginning because we were going off of golf and all the things that we're talking about, is we later learned that the first peak will be when the front foot hits the ground. Second peak will be as they rotate into the front leg and then create a vertical thrust as they're going into contact. So yes, there is 2 peaks.
Yeah. And so in particular, just clarifying also, you're talking about vertical force.
Vertical force. So this is not... So there is also a peak in horizontal force that correlates with
very heavily
with the first when your stride foot hits the ground, you're going to get a peak in vertical force and horizontal because your front foot is pushing towards the pitcher, stopping yourself from going forward. So you're also going to see a peak there as well that's correlated with the first peak of vertical force because of the stride. So those are very important. And also too, it can cause some, again, I'm getting nerdy now, try to stay on path, but this can also cause some frontal plane torque, right? Which is when you like turn or tilt as you rotate, that horizontal and that vertical from the front leg will tilt the trunk and then get your body to start rotating into the ball.
Yeah. So if you see someone, I'm just going to try to get practical since I know you got nerdy. Yep. If you see somebody that's not creating the peaks or the forces necessary, right? Maybe they're triple peaking. Maybe they're got 1 peak where it's like they're not creating the shapes or either just the number in general that we're looking for. What are some cues or some thoughts or drills that maybe you could think of right off the top of your head?
Yeah, I'll tell you the first one not to do. Don't tell them to slam their front legs. That's not going to be good. I've heard many people tell them to do that. Don't do that. So a lot of that comes into, again, with striding, is you can... Usually it's something to do with the back hip, right? Even though it's the front leg reading, that's the result and not the cause. It isn't. That's why a lot of people try to recreate, again, the effect that's going to happen, but typically it's something from the back leg. So typically this is somebody that's collapsing on their backside. They can't get into their back hip. They're not loading very well. And when they collapse as they stride forward, their back hip like collapses or back knee collapses, things like that. That could be one scenario. So again, it could be like, hey, keep your back hip high, keep your back hip above the ball. Like some of these cues that just kind of give you it's going to help that back adductor and also that back glute kind of stay more engaged and get some activation there. And so you're not collapsing from the backside. Those can be good cues. You can also go to like a step back drill, right? Or something like that, or maybe like bouncing on one leg, right? To get some like activation in the back hip before they fire. We do like the little hops sometimes. Again, that could be something that could help there. Another thing also too can be a lot of times is usually as they're striding, maybe they're trying to rotate before they land. Like they're striding and rotating at the same time. And, there's a big difference, and I wouldn't even say rotating. I would say more like we probably classify it more as like landing into a spin. As spin and rotating are different. Where again, like we kind of talk about a spin like a yank, right? Is more of like a yank concept rather than like rotating from the middle part of my body. So we kind of, when we say spin, we usually mean like they're pulling away from the ball, like they're rotating off the ball. And then when we say rotating, just like pure rotation. Rotation in the swing is what we want. We don't want players to spin off,
right?
Which is important.
Yeah, no, an old school cue that I think of right off the jump, just talking about this topic is I always grew up and coaches would say like pretend your front foot's landing on ice, like pretend it's like a soft front side. It's like just a cue that jumps into my head immediately.
That is how they interpret it, of course.
Yeah, right.
They can literally bend their back leg and then go out there and like tippy toe
Yeah.
on the front. And then you'll see guys when they do that, they'll like tippy toe out, and then right before they swing, they'll push off their back leg, and then still like that's where that cue can get slippery.
Yeah,
But
no.
I've used that cue a lot.
No, 100%. Like I know my interpretation of that cue myself.
Yeah.
When I was young, it was very poor moves that came from it. But now if I were to use that cue on my own swing, my interpretation of that cue would be different, so I would execute it differently.
Yeah, it can be really good. Anytime you tell players to be soft or quiet with their feet, can cue a lot of pelvic stability, right? That could be really good. That's also too, we talked about that before when we talk about like ladders or guys running ladders, and everybody right now hates ladders.
Yeah.
But one of the things I think that, like doing ladders, what they could be really good for is just some pelvic control. And obviously there's other ways that you can do it, but when you're doing it dynamically and you're getting a lot of adduction and a lot of different angles and vectors that you're kind of moving in different directions, you're moving your feet, is your ability to control your pelvis and not let it tilt and like, co-contract kind of around it, I think is one of its biggest things. So, but again, that's why when guys are doing ladders, when they're being cued for their feet to be quiet, like, hey, quiet feet, I don't want to hear your feet. Well, a lot of agility guys go, well, that's the opposite. When you want to change direction, I want loud feet. I want loud pounding into the ground. I want to hear loud steps, right? Because that means you're putting force like into the ground, and like, putting and striking the ground really hard. So like, again, that's why a lot of agility guys or, strength guys don't like ladders, is because they're cueing all the opposite. But I think it's more like a pelvic control thing than it is about how much force can I actually create.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so like as you dive into that, and this is where it'll get real fun, is the second question he asked was, can you create 2 times your body weight, right?
Yeah. Well, didn't he? Was there one in between there? I think he. I just want to make sure I don't miss one.
Yeah. No, the first question was, does that mean all hitters' body weight transfers to the front foot twice?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Right.
So that's
So-
I'm gonna answer that part.
So the front foot peaks twice
Yes.
was the
but,
first one, and does the body weight
Body weight.
transfer to the front foot twice?
yes. Okay. That's the part I wanted to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
Is there transfer of weight to the front side twice?
Mm-hmm.
No. Is there two force? Well, again, could there be? Sure.
Yeah.
But there should just be one
Should be
transfer
one,
of force,
yes.
right? Transfer of weight,
Mm-hmm.
right? Now, we also got to remember the difference between pressure shift
Mm-hmm.
and weight shift.
Yeah, I think
Those
that's a
are-
big one.
Those are different
Yeah, I
things.
think that's a big misinterpretation and misunderstanding.
Yes.
While I think a lot of people are trying to level up their knowledge in
Yes.
that information, I think that's a common
Yeah,
misunderstanding.
because and we've posted videos like that before talking about that, is like having that idea of, okay, so a pressure shift, like for example, I can put my front foot in the ground and shift pressure into my front side, but not shift my center of mass.
Mm-hmm.
So again, like for example, like when my front foot gets into the ground and I put pressure into my front side, when you look at pressure and a pressure shift, is if your right leg's on the only thing on the ground, well, all the pressure, when the software is reading the pressure, it's going to say 100% of your pressure is on your backside.
Right.
As soon as your front foot, even if you tippy toe and put your front toe on the ground, it's going to shift towards the front, because you have more you have pressure in the front side and somewhere else on the force plate, right, or a pressure board, as well as the backside. So it's going to read a pressure shift, right? Now we do want pressure in our front side, right? Which again, pressure means force, right? If there's pressure, there's force, right? Now, how much force is going to be dependent on a couple different things, and then one vector, obviously, that's where you get into a force plate. That's why a force plate and a pressure plate are different things. They measure and they read different things. Pressure plates infer force, but they again are very inaccurate. They're like backlogging it. It's not. Again, there's a force plate for a reason. They're also very different price ranges for a reason. A weight shift can be different. So the different with that as well. Can I shift my pressure and my weight at the same time? Yes. Right. You can, as soon as your front foot hits the ground, your weight can go with it. 1000%. Right. But typically when we say, hey, when I want to get forward while I stay back, is I want my pressure to get forward, right? I want to start putting force into my front leg while my weight is still back, right, in my launch position. I don't want to have my weight shifted. As soon as I land with my front foot, I don't want all my weight on my front side, right? That's an early leak. I'm cheating to a location, right? My weight is shifted early. Like I don't want to have and also too, this is the other thing. People also misinterpret that the weight shifts all at once.
Yeah.
Right. And that also doesn't happen. Right. Now, is there times where there's more weight on one leg or another? 1000%. But it's not just like all the weight immediately goes forward. Again, there's a gradual shift of weight, of loading from one leg to the next, or unloading, if you would, as the body rotates. So again, as your foot lands, there's gonna be some shifting of weight. Again, I'm not 90, again, we'll describe things of like, oh, hey, think 80 back leg, 20 front leg, all these things. But first off, our body's not 100 pounds, okay? Right. Or unless you literally weigh 100 pounds, right, Nikki P? But at the same time, again, it's remembering like 80% or 20%. Just because that's a cue doesn't mean that that's actually happening, and we can measure that, right? So typically, again, and there's also a difference of, now this is, look, we're getting a little deeper, right? This is where there's layers. There's a big difference between weight and mass. Like center of mass and weight distribution are different things, right? Center of mass is where your center of your mass is during your swing. Weight is different from center of mass, right? And that's, weight distribution is different. Now, your weight distribution, and there's some correlations. There's some correlations with where your center of mass is, for sure. It's not that they're completely separate and there's nothing, but there is differences between those. And again, your weight distribution is going to be a different measurement, right? That we're weighing, and we can measure, like, for example, how much weight is on your back leg compared to how much weight is on your front leg. That can be measured. Now, all right. Unpacking that. Sorry, we're peeling back the layers of the onion here.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's good.
Because again, this is why sometimes I get this a lot. You guys will send us DMs sometimes thinking that they're very simple questions, but there's actually a lot of layers to them. And again, if I just give you a one-word sentence, like, that's why I told the guy back, I'm like, yo, that's like a podcast. You asked me like a whole podcast breakdown.
Well, and too, like for us, like if we give them a one sentence response, it's wrong. And then we're misleading, which also too, we don't want to mislead. So
So again, if there's something like that, that's why a lot of times I'm like either I can't reply right then because I can't get into it, or again, it's something like, it's like, okay, that's a podcast. Like you actually asked a lot deeper questions than you think you're asking. Like there's a lot of depth to these things.
Which is good too. That's the kind of questions that, lead to, unpacking stuff.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. So you got different things, right? So you got pressure shift, you got center of mass, and you got weight distribution, right? So those are all three different things. Okay. Now, as you rotate, right? First off, when you put your leg on the ground, right, there's weight in your leg. How much weight is dependent on a multitude of factors. Again, for example, if like you're collapsing on your backside, your front leg's going to be more unweighted, but not necessarily in a good way, right? We can act, because this is the other thing. Your vertical force on your front leg is going to be bad because you have all of this weight on your backside. Like I explained this to a kid earlier. I said, hey, if I asked you to jump from your left leg, like jump straight up in the air, like vertical, just single leg jump from your left side, you wouldn't want to be leaning on your right side.
Right.
You'd want to have your weight and your center of pressure over your left side so that you could actually you're in a more leveraged position to put force directly down into the ground, right? And if you're listening to this, like, think about it. If I had you stand on two legs and I was like, hey, jump from your left leg, but you were leaning towards your right leg, you're not going to be able to jump off your left leg very well, right? So if you're collapsing on your backside as you're striding forward, or pushing from your backside and your back hip is collapsing, your vertical force on your front side is not going to be very good. And so a lot of people will describe these things and go, oh, I want my front foot to be weightless. Well, when you actually measure it on a force plate, like, no, you don't. Like the best hitters in the world, their front leg is not weightless. It's not weightless until they swing. It's not, just that's why when people give cues like, oh, rear legged, all these other things, like, yeah, I'm not saying that cue can't really help
be a
somebody.
Good cue or feel,
but what the same idea is remembering what is a feel and what is actually happening with the best hitters in the world. And again, when you measure these hitters, it's like, no, they don't their front leg isn't just weightless out of the ground. A lot of times they actually see a vertical, where when a guy creates a vertical, his body comes out of the ground. We'll talk about that in a second. It will appear to be weightless, but he created a ton of force with his front leg to get his body out of the ground in the first place. Okay. So no, the weight distribution, it doesn't go right leg, left leg, right leg, left leg, right? Like it isn't, you don't just shift back and forth. It's not a, constant rocking back and forth. There is a weight there is a weight shift that happens throughout the swing.
Mm-hmm.
Pressure is different. Center of pressure or weight or pressure shifts happen multiple times throughout the swing,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's based off of forces,
Right.
right? But weight shift happens one time, throughout the swing as I go to rotate. Now, after you hit the ball, you might rock back to your back leg, right? Especially if you're going to like a trout step over, something like that, right? Or a re-anchor with the back leg. You might shift your weight, but the ball's already gone, right? That's way deep in the finish of the swing. Like when the ball is long gone, like, again, like you've finished almost like you're at the end of your swing and your weight might shift backwards. Yeah, exactly. It's more of like a pimp. So like, yes, in that case, all within time frames, that might be true. So yeah, the difference between that. So yes, you're not, you shouldn't be going load, left leg, right leg, left leg, actually shifting your weight. No, that doesn't happen. Pressure, it fluctuates and it's based on how much force and where you're pressing in your feet at what different times, which again has more to do with force than it has to do with weight. Yeah. And another way of explaining this, let me give this another analogy for someone that's kind of trying to differentiate the two. For example, you can stand in front of me. Let's say I was laying on my back, right? I was laying on my back. You were standing right in front of me. My feet were facing you, right? Like how Kodee, me and you were facing each other. If you come running at me and I kick you in the chest, my weight isn't there, but I got force there.
Right.
You get what I'm saying? So my weight is on the ground or on this chair, right? But my force can be going forward, right? And that's the same thing can happen in our legs. Knox is in there getting it in.
Oh, he's fired up.
Yeah, but yeah, sorry, we got the babies in the background. If you can't hear, these mics are good, so you might not be able to hear that. But and in any case, for example, my weight doesn't have to be somewhere for there to be force, right? And so, for example, like the same thing too, I could have my weight more back, and there'd be pressure and force in my front leg, even though my total, my 100% of my weight's not on my front side.
Right.
Again, the other thing is, again, I just want to get back to the weight distribution thing, is that, again, a lot of people think it's not like there's 100% on my right leg, and then when I go to swing, 100% goes to my left leg.
Right.
That's not, we don't want that either. Actually, I'm going to give my boy a shout out. He actually did this the other day. Ian Jenkins, I think he gave a pretty good idea. Like he showed a great visual. So try to imagine with me, if you're just listening to the audio, what he did, I'm gonna give. Think about. For some reason, I went to graham crackers. But imagine if you had 2 graham crackers, right, and they're stacked on top of each other, right? And I said graham crackers, but it's just he had 2 pieces of like wood or something that were on top of each other. But basically, he put springs in between them, right? And he was like, if all of my weight is on my right leg, the left spring is super stretched and the right spring gets really compressed, right? But if we want to compress our legs into the ground and actually be able to use our legs, and like we need to be level, like our staying between our feet is really important, so we can actually have pressure in each leg so that we can use that. And that is what he was explaining. And again, probably where I'm going to like add some layers to what he was explaining is that he's explaining that for us to be able to create torque and use both legs to create a high amount of torque and rotation for our body, is you do want vertical force and weight, right, on each leg, so that both of the springs get compressed at the same time. I also don't want to be super heavy on my front side, because if I'm super heavy on my front side, then I'm unloading that spring on my back side, and I can't create a large torque for my back leg either. Right. And a lot of people do that attempting to scissor early, right? Or trying to create a scissor. They'll weight shift early, right? And then that back leg does scissor, but it's not a good scissor, and it was an early weight shift, right? So you want to have a little bit of both. Some guys get stuck on their backside, some guys get stuck on their front side, but we want to try to compress both those springs and have weight going down equally on both legs as I go to rotate, right? And then as I go to rotate, that's why a lot of people will say 50-50.
Yeah.
And they're rotating through 50-50. But think of it more like this. Let's just say, and that's different from different guys. That could be a great cue. It could be a bad cue for certain dudes.
For sure.
Some guys think 50-50 and they're actually like 70 on their front side.
Yeah.
Right? Or, again, because of their pelvis, and like we can get into all the anatomical stuff that another time. But in any case, imagine you're actually more like, 60-40, somewhere in between that, right? 40 on my front side, 60 on my back side, right? As I go to land, where again, and again, I say that because it's more like center of mass. My center of mass is more 60% towards my backside than it is towards my front side, right? But as I go to start transition, and it happens really quickly, right? Within a couple, like 20 degrees of like rotation of my pelvis, which is really small. People don't realize how few degrees that actually is. As I go to rotate, I rotate through 50-50 really early into my turn, right?
Yeah.
And then as I continue my turn, as I start getting into contact, I shift a ton, not only pressure, weight, center of mass, all of those things are going to then transition, and I'm going to get a ton of all of that into my front leg later on into my turn.
Yeah. So an example of that too, and could be wrong, but you just tell me. An example thinking of this is I was kind of explaining this to a hitter earlier this week when we were doing turners. What a good example of maybe your weight distribution may not be great. Maybe you got slightly weighted onto your front side, but they were able to keep their center of mass back. Would be I got fooled on a slider or curveball, but I was able to stay back or stay behind the ball and still be productive with it. That's kind of how I described it to this hitter was like, no, I don't want you to have all of your weight on your front side. But if you do, I want you to know how to keep your center of mass back. Not how I described it to him, but
if your center of mass gets over or outside your front leg, you're in some real trouble.
Yeah, a lot of
that's
trouble.
when you're like butt out, leaning over your front side, reaching. That's
sorted.
Again, that's where people get mixed up. When we say like get into your front side or get your front leg in the ground, like all those other things, a lot of times they're mixing up center of mass, weight distribution, or pressure shift, and understanding, do I want to shift my pressure before I swing, before I launch my swing? Yes. Do I want to shift my weight before I launch my swing? No. Right. And again, and then also you got to talk in like what actually is launch, right? Or and again, a lot of people are like, oh, like I'm starting. I can feel myself starting my swing before my front leg's in the ground. But yeah, like as you go to start your swing, that feel is, again, as you start to rotate, it plants your front foot. And so for a lot of guys, that can be a really good like CNS cue, right? To get their body to like actually plant and not get stuck on their back hip, right? So that can be part of it too. Some people also too are trying to get like a running start where it's a lot easier to rotate my pelvis fast with my front leg not in the ground, in the sense of I can spin very easy, right? But not necessarily what we're looking for either. Unless, and again, does that create force? Sure.
Yeah.
It's just not the most efficient, right? And it comes into like, again, you're using a lot of athleticism to try to get that way, rather than again, along with it, it's like, again, a lot of those guys have issues with their front hip. There's something going on with their front hip, and they have some dysfunction. And then again, they're trying to avoid something later on. You just reminded me of I wanted to break into the difference of the domino effect. We'll have to do that. We'll have to do that in a different podcast.
But again, that goes back into like this question's bigger than what a lot of people think it is, right? Sure. And then too, we try to simplify things and make things to our understanding or our level, right? And it's like, it really is more complex than that. But, good coaches can learn how to break it down and simplify it to whoever they're training or coaching.
Well, and I think it's just how you package it, right? Like, I was actually talking to this with Steve, right? I gave an eval. Steve sat there and shadowed the eval that I was giving, right? But also, with that being said, when I was thank you, trying to go do security. He was sleeping the whole time until Drew went out, and then all of a sudden he woke up. Is that Steve shadowed the eval, right? And I'm presenting it to, what is he, 15? 15, 16?
16, yeah.
15, 16-year-old kid, right? And his dad. They're not biomechanists. They're not strength coaches, right? So I'm packaging the information into a way that, what does he need to know? And again, he doesn't need to understand it like I understand it for him to be able to perform, right? And also too, what level do I need to get in, like a buy-in or all those other things? Like, okay, like what does that mean to him, and like how can I package it to him? Now, when we got done with the eval, Steve came up to me and asked me a lot of really in-depth questions about training and what I was seeing here and the forces and all these other things. And we got into nerd time and we went deep with things, right? But that other kid didn't need to know that. Steve needed to know that and could understand that, because to him, it wasn't drinking out of a fire hose, because he has a base level of knowledge to understand all the things that I'm describing, comparatively to, again, a 15, 16-year-old kid who knows very little about anatomy, forces. And then again, Steve has worked with force plates,
Yeah,
with the A's. He's already done all these other things. He has a background on all these things. So when we and him talk, we can talk to a different level. When I talk to a biomechanist who, again, there's also a difference. There's biomechanists that don't have a lot of deep background and force plate data.
Mm-hmm.
They might have a different emphasis, like a doctor, right? There's different doctors that have specialties in different things. Some guys specialize in force plate data.
Right.
Some guys specialize in, how the arm, does things, right? And like, and again, like you have like more of like, almost like when people were like orthopedic doctors or things like that, right? Like they might have the biomechanics of a very specific area of the body they might be very good with, or maybe their overall like kinematics, all these other things, right? There's different emphasis. Everybody just groups all these guys together. There's layers of layers of layers of layers, right?
Yeah.
But I want to hit back on what you just said is that when we started this, right, of that piece, right, is that I said that yesterday, is like, we want to dumb things down, right? We want to dumb the problems down and go, oh yeah, well, it's simple, it's simple, it's simple. Like, remember, the only time something becomes simple is when you deal with it a lot. And then also too, when you understand the complexity and you do it so much. Like my brother says, my brother was like, we were at a job site and he was talking to one of his employees, and he goes, it's common sense. And I looked at him and I go, I have no, like, not, he was talking to his employee, right? And I, who don't do anything with marble and granite and, all the things that they do, casinos, bro. He's doing casino work. He's doing mansions, and he's talking about some sophisticated, like, part of what they do, right?
Common sense.
And then, so he goes, oh, it's common sense, right? And then I said to him afterwards, we talked later, I said, it's common, when people say that, it's common sense. This world lacks common sense, all these other things too. A lot of people don't understand. It's common to you. It's common to you because you do it every day. If you want to come in here with the hitting and you want to go into anatomy and all these other stuff, to me, it's common sense. Like, even he said that to me. Steve said that to me earlier. He goes like, oh, I get it. It's like, yeah, that's common sense, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And I'm like, and then he stopped himself and he goes, well,
yeah,
I mean, I guess it's common. It's not a big stretch for me because I have a foundation of understanding prior. If I was talking to some random, 15, 16-year-old kid or a dad that isn't whatever, it's like, this is not common at all, right? And we're just slowly going through where, like, that kid, and again, we have to learn how to package what info we give them, right? And how sophisticated and how in-depth. I can go, it's kind of like a rubber band, right? But it's not a rubber band. Connective tissue is not just rubber bands.
But it's a great way to get some people to, grasp that topic.
Correct.
Sure.
But it's much more than a two-dimensional rubber band running around our body. But that's a great visual and, like, us to start to understand certain things. But it's much more complicated than that. But at the same time, it's a good way of a base level of understanding. So one of the things that you and I we talk about this too. It's like, I could break it down to you like you're a 5-year-old, but you're going to understand it like you're a 5-year-old. You don't have the understanding. Like, again, when a doctor comes into you and tells you about this complicated medical issue that you have, he can explain it to you like a high school kid, right? But you're going to understand it like a high school kid and not a doctor or a professional who went to school for 6 years and has 20 years of experience in the field, right? That is going to be a very different understanding and again, you know why that's going to be a very different understanding? You don't want Joe Schmo that had a doctor explain to him what's wrong with you for him to be your doctor, right? You didn't want to, that guy stayed at a Holiday Inn. No, you want someone that actually went to school for this, that is an expert in this, that has to deal with this problem all the time, that has performed, thousands of other surgeries or whatever, right? And that's where it becomes super important. It's like, it's not just because again, someone gives you a surface level understanding. Sometimes we start to think that we know more about it than we really do because someone did a good job of dumbing it down to a space where I can start to wrap my head around it. But it doesn't mean that you actually understand it to, the doctor's depth.
Yeah, no, there's this post I brought up to you the other day, and there were some pretty fire quotes in there, but there's one in particular that stands out just talking about that. Was the wisdom paradox, and it was an Albert Einstein quote where it's like, the more I learn, the more I realize how much I don't know. It's like, the more you learn, the more you are exposed to the immense unknown. This should be empowering, not frightening. Embrace your own ignorance. Embrace lifelong learning. And so I just, that brings up that topic. But
Yeah.
also too, kind of going back to that last question of the peaking twice, or I believe I want to get the wording right
Yeah,
that he had. He had a specific wording that he used was, does that mean all hitters' body weight transfers to the front foot twice, right? I want to get back to that because I think how you finished answering some of that with the center of mass, the weight distribution, the foot pressure, and all that will then segue pretty good into his last question, which was, is it possible to produce ground force 2 times your body weight? Because I think also, too, this is going to open up a really big part of this conversation that a lot of people don't think about, especially to me getting to do a lot of these evals and like,
Yeah.
you get a wide variety of parents and athletes. Like some don't know what a force plate are. Some of them have heard of a force plate. Some think they know everything there is about force plates and they get in and look at the, it's like you get the whole plethora.
Yeah.
It's like, and then being able to explain it and then just seeing the biggest gaps. And so I think too, I'm not even going to bring it up because I know you're going to say it, is like that. Can you create 2 times your body weight and force on a force plate?
Yeah.
Let's open that up a little bit.
Okay. So first thing, remember and what vector is going to be very important, right? There's not one force, right? There's all these other forces going. If you can't create 2 times your body weight, you're going to be in trouble, right? And so this is where it's super important. We got to remember, okay, let's say I have a 1 pound block, just a 1 pound weight block, right? If I create 1 pound of force and push on the block's not going anywhere because it's an equal weight. The block can't move because it is 1 pound itself.
Right.
1 pound of force, that thing's not moving anywhere. Now, when I start getting over that 1 pound of force, right? As I start creating more, it's going to start creating a force that is higher, right? Then it's resting. I think inertia is the correct word. It's resting inertia where it will start to move. Now, that's if it was floating in space and there was no other forces. Now, if it's on certain surfaces, right, you might have to overcome the friction of that surface. So in general, you would think that, again, like I need to create more force to create these things to happen. So, for example, is you got to remember that, yes, that's why when you read on the force plate data and we go by percentages, when you first get on there, the force plate weighs you, right? So then you get a weight. It knows how heavy you are. And then it gives you a percentage. And there's certain movements that you do that are less than your body weight, right? A lower percentage than your body weight. And again, if it's less than your body weight, there could be a couple different things happening, right? First off, if my leg is off the ground, right, and all my weight isn't there, I don't need as much force. My leg doesn't weigh as much as my whole body. So again, I could be creating a force like while I'm striding and I'm moving my leg in space. I don't need as much force, right, to move that. Now, again, the force plate's not going to read that. That's something that's internal forces, right? But my point is with that. Now, when you go to every other force that you're measuring throughout the swing, it's going to have a higher percentage than 100%, right? Because 100% is just your body weight, right? So when we go and we measure like vertical force, like you need a minimum of 180%, right? So that's a minimum of almost double your body weight, right? In golf, they say that it's a requirement, right? That's like every elite PGA Tour player is over 200%, but in baseball, it's different because your legs are wider. You don't need as much vertical force. You're not hitting a ball off the ground, hitting it straight up. So again, you can get down to like 180% is good, right? So there's all of that. When it happens is still important. All that stuff is super important. We're getting in the weeds now, huh?
Yeah.
And good questions though. And then again, when we talk about like torque, we want to create a lot of force, right? Because this is our rotation ability, our ability to rotate and counter rotate. It's super important for how well I force production and force transmission and actually getting that force actually into the ball when I'm doing a rotational activity. So that will be super important. Vertical, for example, I also need to have more than my body weight as well to overcome my resting inertia, right? Where I want my body to come up If I want my body to go up, like coming out of a squat, you have to overcome that. That's also too why when we're in the weight room, when we do squats or we do deadlifts or we do those things and we load the bar, it's more than our body weight. We're already squatting our body weight, right? So that means that, again, we're getting 100% of our force to even be able to go up and down. Now, if I want to move that force, if I want to even body weight, if I want to get up quicker, I better create more force. Even if I'm creating my body weight, like I'm not going to be moving very fast. If I need to create that force more, I need to create more force. That's why squatting, all that other stuff, I train my body to be able to create vertical force in a again, way more than my body weight. And that's why like most elite athletes are like 3 to 5 times their body weight. Insane, like 5 times is obviously like, extreme, crazy. Insane, power lifters and stuff like that, right? Like some of the top in the world, things like that, right? I think there is some guys that are like even like 6+ times their body weight, which is insane, like what some of these guys can do. But again, most elite athletes, like, or at least over 3, girls might be a little bit less, like, 2 to 3 times, depending on the exercise and all those other things. But most like really elite men are usually over, over with that as well. And then like, again, the most elite girls are towards the top spectrums of those things as well. Right. So that being really important. But yeah, like is it possible? Damn right it's possible. Or you wouldn't be able to, you wouldn't be able to jump very high. You wouldn't be able to do any of those things. You wouldn't be able to, hit the ball very hard. And also too, you got to think about that again, like rate of force development, like the more force I can create, and also over a shorter period of time, rate of force development, right? Which is again, the same thing. How quickly am I creating that force? Right. Super important when I'm looking at how strong I am and power and all those things as well. But for jumping and all those other things, like that's how guys have like 40-inch verts, stuff like that. Super important. Horizontal force, again, same things as well. Again, and also too, I don't want to dumb this down. We're talking about 3 main forces, but there is much more forces than those 3. And also too, when we say horizontal, there's more than one horizontal force. You have toe heel. You also have, left, right, which is pitcher to catcher. So you got different things as well as like getting into that. And again, not to overwhelm you guys, but I just want to tell you that there's a lot to this stuff, right? It's not just, this, like this or that and it's over. Right. And then again, the biggest one obviously is your ability for torque. If I want to rotate this body and it's resting inertia and I want to be able to rotate it. And then not only that, I was just telling Steve this, my ability of I need to decel, but I need to decel with so much more rate of force development. I have such a small period of time to actually stop that my brakes have to be way stronger, so much stronger that again, this is why muscle is slow. It's too slow to do the full work, that fascia and things that when you can even measure, you can't measure when you talk about mechanical tension, for example, again, like a rubber band or a big rope or something like that, when that thing gets taut and it goes and it gets all that slack is pulled out, when you're measuring how quickly that response is to the end it's insanely fast. Like it's abrupt. Again, almost it's instantaneous, right? Like all of those things where like when people are like, oh, like you don't have time to decel. Yeah. If you're thinking about it from an active standpoint. Now, you also do have an active component, right? And your ability to create tension in your body, pull out slack and all those other things and co-contract, all these other things as well. You do have those other systems that again you can be adjustable. You can get into your front leg a little bit. You can do those other things. But again, when we're talking about deceleration in general, a lot of it has to do with leverage, sequencing, timing, all these other things. Whereas like, when does that slack get pulled out? Does it ever get pulled out? Also, it's not a 2-dimensional stretch, right? You got 3-dimensional like space, like, so think of it like 2 rubber bands from hand to hand. This is Randy Sullivan explained it this way. I think he stole it from Franz Bosch, but if I take a rubber band and have it in my left hand and have it in my right hand, okay, that's 2-dimensional stretch. But then again, imagine Kodee, you walk up to the rubber band and you grab the middle and you pull out from the middle. That's 3-dimensional stretch. That's how our body actually is. And that's why you have a whole bunch of rubber bands running across your body. Okay, now, how do the muscles play into that? The muscles are pulling on the fascia, right? And there's layers of all this fascia. There's not one layer of fascia. There is layers and layers and layers of fascia and interwebbed and all these things. So when a muscle contracts, it pulls on the fascia and can help pull out three-dimensionally, can pull out that three-dimensional space tension,
Mm-hmm.
right? That can pull out that slack so that we can create more force and transfer more force, throughout
Mhm.
that energy. And then, think about it again too. We talk about this like rubber band as well. Kodee from you to me, we're holding a rubber band. You're holding it tight. We pull all the slack out, right? I flick the rubber band. You can feel the energy in your hand because there's so much tension in it.
Mhm.
That's like, the old back in the day, we were talking to the
Yeah, the
you
little
don't know
can
about that one.
phones.
Talking to the can phones,
Easy,
right?
easy.
You got a
You ain't that
string.
much older,
You
dog.
you got a string into your can. I got a string into my can. If the string is loose,
Mm.
that sound won't travel through the string and actually get into the can. If it's tight, then you can get that sound, the transfer. So the same thing with our body, right? We need that tension so we can transfer not only, we're talking about sound, but it's waves of energy, right?
Mhm.
And vibration is really what sound is, right? So again, the same thing as well is when we look at that, right, too, as well, it's like the body's the same way. If there's slack in the system, that energy can't transfer. And again, you're not going to get that instantaneous. And you're actually going to be dissipating a ton of the force that you created and not transferring that energy up my body, the kinetic chain, right?
Mhm.
Up my body and actually getting it like into the ball.
Yeah, and so to simplify it, yes, you can.
You better.
Most
The
people,
answer
if
is
I
you
see,
better.
if I see somebody not doing that, we got a serious problem. In an eval, we got some real work to do if you're not creating more than your body weight or 2 times your body weight.
Yes.
When I say like the positive or accelerating forces, definitely more common that I see people don't 2 to 3x the decelerating forces, but
Yes.
yes, definitely can create,
And
and should probably create at least 2 times your body
I
weight.
was going to say the other thing with this too is just remember, me and Steve were talking about this. There's also a very big difference between force production and what I need to complete a skill,
Mm.
right? When I pick up my drink, I don't need the maximum ability of my body to pick up that drink. The coordination and what I'm turning on and when is
Mhm.
based on the task that I'm completing. When I'm fighting somebody and we're standing in a boxing stance and he takes a step to the left and I take a step to the left, I'm not bounding to my left as hard as I can.
Mhm.
I'm creating as much force as I need to complete that task. So something that's very important as well is everybody just goes, a lot of strength side of things will go, well, we just need more force. We just need all these other things. And it's like, no. We need how much force I need to complete the task.
Mhm.
And again, some of the movements in the swing are not for power.
Right.
They're positional, they're leverage. They're going to get, like, again, when I'm boxing a guy, when he steps to the left and I step to the left, it's not a power move.
Mm.
Is to get me in position and orientation so that I can throw a really powerful strike.
Right.
So there's certain parts of the swing, for example, we'll have young kids that outpower our pro guys.
Yeah.
And then they'll go, what?
And some
How
of
is
the
that
forces, yeah.
possible? I'm way stronger. Like the pro guy is way stronger than the young kid. Yes, but Trout is not trying to bound from his back leg towards the pitcher.
Mhm.
And that little kid who doesn't create large torques and all those other things, the only way he can create any power is he's trying to jump with momentum,
Mhm.
right? To try to create rotation because he's so weak and like,
Mhm.
and transverse, plane, right? They just can't rotate very hard. And he
Right.
can't counter rotate very hard.
Mhm.
Okay, so if that's the case and he can't use those other strategies, his body comes up with a new way to create that strategy.
Mhm.
And that typically happens vertical or horizontals from the back leg because, again, we typically develop sagittal, then frontal, right, strength, and then typically the last one to get developed is more transverse power, which that's why a lot of athletes, like, again, are very strong in frontal and sagittals, which, again, sagittal is like more up, down, vertical force. Frontal is more horizontal, side to side, catcher to pitcher. And again, lateral bounds, things like that. And then finally, that's why, again, like there's a lot of football players that are really weak in the transverse plane. They can't rotate and throw med balls very hard, all that stuff, because they don't have a lot of rotation in their sport,
Right.
unless you're like a quarterback or, that's why also a lot of football players that were baseball players are usually like running backs, quarterbacks, wide receivers, positions like that where there's a lot more rotation rather than like offensive linemen or defensive linemen or
Right.
things like that. They don't rotate very well.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think too, with all these questions, I think all of them you can go way deeper. But I think the main thing too with some of the questions that he asked is realizing some of these simple thoughts that we may all have, the answers to them are way more complex than we actually know.
Yeah.
You know, it probably even more complex than we, you know, can even
Yeah, there's
describe
always
right
more
now.
to
We're
it.
always going to continue to learn.
Yeah.
And so, but I think that's a good foundation too. And then I also like from the side of like the practical side of like all this information too. It's super interesting because then, you know, like we talk about this, but then we get to like make it applicable to, you know, a high school kid or a 13-year-old. Like, you know, I'm going to use one of our 13-year-olds again in that sense is, you know, his interpretation was, I need more force. I'm not swinging hard enough. Like that was
Yeah.
something very important to him. And as you start to unpack through these conversations, was I need more force. He's 13, plays up to 16U, so he's playing against these big kids. Feels underpowered, wants to create more force. So he starts to create it in the frontal plane
Yeah,
by like creating that
competition
horizontal
matters.
force.
Yep.
Right. And it's like, okay, well, we don't need you to be 2 times your body weight during your stride going forward.
Yeah.
We need you to
Ratios
be
are
it
important.
here, right? And we need this type
How
of
I get
force to be
strong is
2
important.
times our body weight, right?
Yeah.
And so that's where too I think it gets real fun and real interesting when you can start to apply that, like, you know, because some people could take that like the question, like if you would have answered it just super simple, is okay, yes, you do. Well, someone can interpret that as like I need to create 2 times my body weight pushing.
Into my
It's like
front leg
no,
and go back
no.
and forth. But
Yeah, right.
No.
Like that would be catastrophic.
Yeah.
Right? You lose a lot of space, a lot of direction, right? And so, but really from a question standpoint, I mean, that's all he really asked. But I think those are really good questions where,
Yep.
you know, we got to dive into force plate data, which we don't always get to.
Yeah.
But then also to like some applicable stuff. So
Yeah, and also too, like how people would think about it. And this is the thing too, as well. It's like, again, that's why I say like all the time as well. Is a lot of us. That's why I'll ask people on social media all the time. Sometimes I think I'm being an ass, but when I'm like, hey, like how much experience do you have with force plate data? Because I'm telling you, before I had a force plate, I thought about ground force very different. Before I had biomechanists and all these guys that we've worked with and understanding ground force and how our body actually creates forces and then tying it back into anatomy and kinesiology and all these other things. And then also, okay, now I know all these things. How do I actually teach it? How do we actually fix it? How do we actually do like, you know what I'm saying? We've been over here grinding.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So I think that's the thing as well. I ask that because again, people have some big assumptions about what, first off, you can tell by the questions that people ask if they understand, if they've actually spent time with ground force. And then also too, the cheapest force plates are vertical plates, and people do them in the gym all the time. And then because they can only measure vertical, they think that those are the only forces that are happening, and that's just not true.
Yeah.
It's just incorrect.
Yeah. No, I'm spoiled, dude. I walked into this thing and it was like force plate. But
Yeah.
too, also to that point is even since I first got here a couple years back, like some of the conversations that we've had of like, hey, I used to do this, but once we got the force plate and I realized how important the front leg is, I'm like,
Yes.
dang, like I teach that
100%.
different now.
That's
you know?
why. That's why even when I'm telling you, like we'll have to do it here soon. Is like Candy just even in the Candle area is even ever since, you know, even in the last like 2 weeks, me and him have some conversations. Like we're talking about fascia stuff, all this stuff. Like we'll have to have him share stuff here at some point where he's like, bro, I've never thought of it that way. Dang, I've never seen that applicably. Like, you know, I've read it in a textbook. I kind of had my idea around it. And I said this to someone the other day too. I was like, a lot of people think about force plates or any of this information and they go, oh, I understand force plate, check. I understand ground force, check. Rather than being like, bro, there is depths of knowledge. There's doctors, they're all doctors, check, but they all have experience in different things, right? And also they all have different specialties, right? So you can't just go, yeah, I know these things. No. Like, dude, there is ever growing depth. There's ever growing. We're learning new things. There's new ways to measure stuff. There's all these other things. Like there's not, I just understand. Like if someone comes with me and is like, you understand ground force, right? I'm like, I mean, yeah, to a degree.
Yeah.
Like, you know, on the same side of that, like I'm still learning every single day. Now, when it comes to in the baseball space, like in the baseball swing specifically,
yeah,
I'm probably, again, when you go around the world, like, again, people are flying from Japan to come and learn what we know about ground force when it comes directly to the swing. Like, we're one of probably the top authorities there in the world right now that has so much experience with that specifically. You know, like, for sure.
Yeah, and to add to that, I mean,
pitching, I wouldn't be so good, by the way.
yeah, but and to that, I think something that is unique that I just noticed is we also take the information, but we try to train it. Like, we have drills that we've used to improve or manipulate and change the forces that we see, and give us direction for training. Where I know a lot of people, they understand force plate. Hey, we want to be in these numbers. Hey, we want to be 180%. Hey, we want to be here. But also, like, okay, so how do I, if I'm not there, how do I get it there? Right. And so that's another thing too that I would say is like pretty unique and, you know, special about our setup, is that we have the ability to then, okay, like, we see your numbers, but this is also some stuff that we've done and seen the improvement, you know, on, you know, when it comes to particular drills and fields and stuff.
And we have it in a cage environment. That's what a lot of people, this is why you're like, force plates has been out for a while. Like, why would we be so, like, why are people so interested in the things that we're doing with force plates, you know, like, or, you know, other like Driveline, all these other people, right? That they even Driveline just recently when it came to hitting, like, they haven't had force plates with hitting in a live environment, because this is the thing. Most labs are not set up for a ball to be shot out of a machine and a guy to free swing. We got to remember, most labs are $500,000 and they got cameras everywhere and they can't go through nets, and they had to develop all this technology. So now we got these thin nets and there's ways to protect the cameras, and like, we figured out how to do some more things now. But like, remember, like, these environments, like, this is when it comes specifically to the task that we're doing, this isn't force plates of somebody walking. This isn't golf when it's just sitting there and, again, we're hitting into a net and the ball is just sitting there on a tee. Like, we're able to measure when a ball is flying at somebody and what those ground forces look like, not just, and we still measure off the tee. We still do all these things. And again, philosophy wise, and why we do all the things we do from an assessment standpoint. But again, along with that is, like, a lot of people don't understand, like, yo, like, again, that's why MLB orgs, that's why all these guys are coming from Japan, like, all those other things is like, yo, like, people don't have that ability to do that. And then also to understand it and intertie it in with how you train and all the things. And bruh.
Yeah. Y'all getting some secret sauce in this one.
Yeah.
Because there's just not a lot of information out there.
Yeah.
But
yeah. And then also people that have it, you got to go and do trial and error and try to learn all these things and all this stuff. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, and then too, this isn't even that deep. This is common sense for me. You know what I'm saying? But at the same time, that's because we use it every day.
Right.
I understand. Like, if y'all would have came in here day one, I'd have been like, huh? Whoa. Again, like, we talked about this. Tell them about the biomechanist.
Oh, yeah. So, well, and too, I think this goes back into the training thing. Like, the biomechanist was looking at the information, like, looking at the data as data. It's a number, right? But then you're looking at it as a practical, okay, what does that number mean from a result standpoint? And then you guys get talking.
How do you know that's a good number?
Yeah, it's like, okay, so that's a good number.
Does it? Great. Yeah. It's like a survivor bias.
Right.
Survivor bias is a guy moves like that. He's been able to survive because he has some outlier stuff, right? Just because he survived and made it there doesn't mean that that's the best way to do it. Right. He just found a way to get there. Right. And he could be super athletic. He could be one of the biggest guys on the planet. He could be one of the strongest guys on the planet. He could be really good at guessing what the pitcher is throwing him. He could be, again, like, I don't know. Like, there could be a lot of things that, like, get why that guy is able to hit with that combination of factors. Maybe he's also really tough, like, mentally, right? Like, all these other things where he can lock in, and even when he fails, like, and a combination of all those things, and maybe he just moves well enough. Doesn't mean that we should be modeling everything off of that one player or these other things. And that's where it becomes hard with ground force data and all those other things. It's like, okay, to get enough data in real environments and all those things, and also understand the swing of the task. And, again, like, and also too, he might be doing that. They had this problem with pitching when they were measuring a lot of pitching things. Guys would be in the lab and the guy wouldn't be going full out because there's a net in front of them, or hitters. We figured that out when we had biomechanists when we're at 108, is when you put a net in front of a hitter, they don't move the same. It's a constraint. Right. So, and they're worried about, well, if I miss this net and I hit this and I hit a ball through that window or I do whatever, right? It's like,
Their external focus
yeah,
changes.
everything
a ton.
changes when they're in a cage and they feel protected and they can actually just hit. Right, things change.
Which, to that point, like our cage pretty big, but even then, you would assume being on a field that would also change, right? If we
Yeah.
could have a force plate on a field and they have,
Yep.
a stadium around them, that would also influence.
Yeah. Now,
moves.
the only thing I don't want to lead people astray with is this, just like I tell the guys, people think it's different. Like when it comes into like patterning of how you're creating your force, it's the same.
Movement signatures.
Movement signature is the same. T, front toss,
Yeah.
hitting off the machine. It's just more exaggerated.
Yeah.
When you hit off when you get more into the game, like but if you know what you're looking for, you can see the movement signatures all the way down to a T.
Yeah.
Right. But yes, if you constrain it too much and you go T, lab environment, and then also too, you got biomechanists and cameras everywhere.
Yeah, stuff
like,
hooked up to your body.
Yeah, and all hooked up to your body and all these things, right? Like, yeah, then it could start getting pretty restrictive. But in our environment, off the tee,
Pretty
like
free.
again, we can look at their force signatures from that, and I can give you again, pretty predictable of like what their force is going to read now, just because we've used it so much.
Yeah.
But anyways, go back to the
but getting into it is like basically there's just a conversation. I wasn't there at the time for it. This was a while ago, but we recorded it and I was able to go back and look at it, and it was just super interesting because it's like, you have this biomechanist that, I mean, also too, not to, again, lead anybody astray. You were learning a lot from him as well, from a numbers and the data, what it means, the interpretation of it.
It's more like, hey, I see this force, I see the graph, right? Help me understand what this force, how it's being calculated.
Right. And then
tell me what
from that calculation, you're using, so you're calculating it like this. This is the angle it creates. This is the move it makes. This is the position the hitters are getting in. And then also to your background with like KVS and kinematics and stuff, like understanding also the transmission up the body and everything, right? It's like you're combining all that information. You're like, oh, okay, well, you're saying there needs to be one peak in vertical force, but when I see hitters, I see this position, this angle, right?
They've only seen a lot of golf.
Yeah, and then you're like, I just don't know if that makes sense, right? And then you guys started going into it, and it's actually funny. I felt like I was watching him then learn more information when it came to once you understood how it was calculated.
Yes,
it was like
I can connect a lot of dots for him.
Yeah, you started, but again, his background, again, like a specialist, it wasn't training. It wasn't. Yeah, like if he were to train an athlete in baseball, like again, like they're not going to him to train, for baseball. But like you in that sense of like, I'm training baseball players, and I need to better understand how it's calculated. And then again, the dots being connected was just like,
yeah.
And then you guys just started, going off, and it was pretty cool to see. But again, like that's where piggybacking off that earlier is like, they're specialists, and then two, I feel like our personal motive is to like try to connect as many dots from all of these specialties as possible to give someone the best experience. Like we just had the minor leaguer come in, and we're talking about that. It's like looking at the force plate data, and he was like, I've heard of force plate data, I've done vertical force, but like, and I've done KVS, but they just said, hey, looks good, sequencing's all right, whatever. And then we do the eval and we talk about it, and it's like, oh, like there's more to it than just my sequencing's good. There's more to it than, your vertical force is good.
I'm a 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's like, okay, like,
there's a lot more than that.
Right. Yeah. And so it was just interesting. It's like, what we're trying to do to connect those dots for people and players, and then, use it to get better and progress and train it. It's unique, it's special. And I'm not saying it from a selfish perspective. I'm saying like, it's a blessing. I'm grateful to be a part of it too. Like, having all this tech and this information and like the access to biomechanists that, he probably doesn't even remember my name, but if he saw my face, he would know me. Like, to be able to ask questions at the booth at ABCA and him clarify things that, I'm seeing and that you're seeing, and you guys talking about stuff like, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's cool. It's cool to get to do what we get to do for sure.
Gratitude.
In
the case y'all didn't see the gratitude one.
Yeah, let's pray. Let's pray it out on that note, huh? All right. Dear Heavenly Father God, we just thank you that we get to do what we get to do, God, and it's all because of you and all the ways that you're moving in our lives, the things that you're preparing for us, the things that you're having us walk into, and God, you walk before us. You get it prepared before we even walk into it, and then when we leave it, God, you come and clean it up, right? You come and clean it up. You fill in the gaps everywhere that we fall short, and God, we're just so thankful that you choose to use us, and that you continue to soften our hearts so that we can surrender these things over to you. And we pray all these things in Jesus' mighty name. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Until next time, Farm System out.
Peace.